Nearly $500 billion of inflationist deficits are ballooning the cost of living in Canada. Too many dollars chasing too few goods means higher prices. Rising cost of government equals a rising cost of living. Now, we've seen this. Across the G20, there is nearly a perfect correlation in October between the creation of money supply and the level of inflation. Those countries that are creating more cash to fund irresponsible government spending have higher inflation, and those countries which are controlling their money are keeping prices down. Here in Canada, the cost of living is a crisis. Look at the facts. Inflation at 4.7% is its highest level in 18 years. And Trudeau says it's just inflation. Housing prices are up a third since 2019. Land prices up 20%. That means families can't afford a place to live, and 30-year-olds are living in their parents' basement because they cannot afford a down payment on our exorbitant real estate. Bloomberg says we have the second most inflated housing market in the world. And what does Trudeau say? It's just inflation. Price of gas up 30%, meaning many working class folks can't even fill their tanks to get to work. And the price of heating the homes of our nation is up as well here in one of the coldest countries on planet Earth. And what does Trudeau say as he lives in taxpayer-funded mansions where his heat is paid for him? He says it is just inflation. Well, it's not just inflation. It's the result of too much government driving up the cost of living for Canadians. He is personally responsible for flooding our economy with cheap cash. His deficits are competing with scarce goods and driving up their prices. We've seen this before, and it is always the same. Inflation is everywhere and always the result of too many dollars chasing too few goods, and thus it is here again with Trudeau's inflation tax. And so Conservatives have specific demands to counter the inflation tax in the upcoming economic update. 1, cancel all tax increases that are scheduled to take effect January 1st. The government is planning to increase payroll taxes on CPP and EI and the carbon tax on people's home heating and on their gas. Starting with the first, the payroll taxes are literally a tax on work. They punish workers for working and employers for hiring. When you tax workers, you punish their work and you take from their paycheck. We already have 1 million vacant jobs. Why would we want to punish people for filling them? This is the irony of the Trudeau economy. They pay people not to work and then punish them when they do and wonder why there are 1 million vacant jobs at the end of the day. So we need to cancel these proposed tax increases that will hit the paychecks of workers if they go ahead on January 1st. And of course, we need to cancel any increases in energy taxes at a time when Canadians cannot fill their tanks or heat their homes. 2, government needs to phase out the deficit, which is driving inflation. The government should cancel the $100 billion of supplementary spending that it planned to stack on top of pre-existing budgets, end all permanent new programs, and return spending back to pre-COVID levels. The temporary, timely, and targeted need for assistance during lockdowns was appropriate at that time, but now we need to get spending back to normal and deficits down to zero. So Conservatives demand a clear plan to eliminate the inflationary deficits that are driving up the cost of living. Our demands are very simple. Less tax, less deficits, less inflation, more paychecks. Make more, cost less, paychecks, not debt. Thank you very much.
We'll now start the question period with a question in the room.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Poilievre. Hi, Rafi Buchanan, CBC News. I'm just wondering, when you say about cutting the supplementary spending, in your view, does that include the newly signed childcare agreements with most of the provinces?
We've said we do not believe in a $100 billion slush fund to increase the cost of living on Canadians. We believe in putting money back in the pockets of the people who actually earned the money. And we believe in, our proposal is to cancel tax increases and cancel any new deficit spending.
But I didn't hear a no in there to what I asked.
Well, you can infer what you want, but what's clear is that all the spending the government is proposing is inflating the cost of living. Too many dollars chasing too few goods means higher prices. They haven't delivered anything on childcare, of course, right? You know, what we hear right now is that they've reiterated their 30-year-old promise that they still haven't delivered on. Right now, what we have is a government that is spending more to achieve less and driving up inflation, and that is what we seek to reverse in the economic update.
Thank you.
Mr. Poilievre, Mike Liquitor with Global National. This week on the West Block, former Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz actually said that it's not politics or politicians that have caused this inflationary issue. So I wanted to know your reaction to it, but also, further to that, looking ahead to the fiscal update, what else do you want to see in there as a more long-term issue? Because Poloz has also said the cost of living issue is not something you can take care of overnight.
So what does he say is causing inflation? You claim that you say that he claims it's not politicians causing inflation. What does he say is causing inflation?
I invite you to watch the interview for more on that. But
well, you're asking me to comment on the interview, so tell me what he says is causing the inflation if it's not politicians spending.
The end of my question was actually, what more would you like to see?
I want to address both parts of your question. Let's start with the first part. What is causing the inflation if it's not politicians spending? What is it?
I appreciate the exchange. I think I would really like the question to be asked of you, if that's okay, because I don't think I'm the one who's being interviewed here. So I just wanted to ask you, in terms of the fiscal update, if former Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz is saying that short-term issues or these cost of living issues cannot be addressed with short-term gains, what would you like to see more long-term? How long do you want to see the taxes not be taken?
Listen, the reason I asked you the question is because Stephen Poloz has to get his story straight. He can't seem to make up his mind what he thinks about inflation or deflation. He claimed in May that there was a massive deflationary force. That was barely 6 months ago. He said there was a deflationary force in the economy 6 months ago. We have not had a single month of deflation since he said that. In fact, we've had inflation above target every single month since his statement that there were deflationary forces driving our economy. He also said at that time that, quote, I can say flippantly, I'm not worried about inflation. And now we have the highest inflation in 2 decades, with housing and land prices up 20% in 1 year. Frankly, everything Stephen Poloz has predicted has proven false by the facts. So I'd actually like to understand what his position is. He says that the COVID pandemic is was going to cause deflation, and now he tries to blame it for inflation. It's time that he actually make up his mind about what he actually thinks about these things, because he contradicts himself from week to week. And you're probably better, if you're listening to him, you should look at his predictions and assume that the opposite is going to happen, because that is exactly what we've seen since he started speaking on these matters. So what can we do? Our specific proposal is to cancel the January 1st tax increases that are going to hit workers and energy consumers, and phase out supplementary government spending to end the inflationary deficits and bring down the cost of living.
And this is not my follow, so I'd really still like my follow. But is that just a precision on that? So is that for 1 year only, or do you want to see those taxes? Like, is that only for 2022 that you're asking for that, or do you prefer that to just be frozen for good?
We do not, conservatives do not support any tax increases ever of any kind.
Fair enough. So just on another subject, in Liverpool, the G7 foreign ministers were warning Russia of, quote, massive consequences if Vladimir Putin attacks Ukraine. Are words no longer enough? As does the G7 and Canada need to take a tougher stance against Russia?
Yeah, look, I think the dictatorships around the world only understand action. They're not interested in words. And as a result, that's why the previous Conservative government took strong stands to confront foreign dictatorships, to defend the sovereignty of the Ukraine. And we would encourage the current Liberal government to do likewise.
Can you be more precise on what you'd like that to look like?
Well, I think you'd be better suited to ask that of our foreign critic, but I would say that we need to work with our allies in order to draw a line in the sand and clarify that there will be serious material consequences if countries like Russia begin attacking the territorial integrity of their neighbors.
Perfect, thank you. Opérateur, avons-nous une première question au téléphone?
Merci. Thank you. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser votre question. The first question, la première question, is from Antoine Trépanier, Le Droit. Your line is now open.
Oui, bonjour, M. Poilievre. Il y a des négociations entre l'Alliance de la fonction publique et le secrétariat du Conseil du Trésor pour le prochain contrat de travail de 110 000 fonctionnaires fédéraux. On parle d'une demande de la part de la FTC de 4,5 de hausse en raison notamment de l'inflation. Qu'est-ce que le gouvernement fédéral devrait prendre comme position selon vous?
Je ne vais pas m'ingérer dans les négociations, mais je vais simplement dire qu'évidemment, tous les travailleurs, y compris les fonctionnaires, souffrent avec l'inflation. Voici les conséquences de la politique inflationniste de Justin Trudeau. Il cause une inflation, puis les coûts du gouvernement augmentent ainsi. Donc, maintenant, les gens cherchent une compensation pour l'inflation que le gouvernement leur a imposée. Et je comprends pourquoi ces travailleurs le veulent, parce que tous les biens et services que les travailleurs vont devoir acheter, que ce soit les maisons, l'essence, la nourriture, augmentent beaucoup plus vite que leur chèque de paie. Et évidemment, leurs syndicats vont demander davantage pour compenser cette politique inflationniste. Donc, Justin Trudeau a causé l'inflation et maintenant, les travailleurs lui demandent d'une compensation. Les coûts vont entourer toute notre économie.
Considérant le fait que il y a des économistes qui disent que si le gouvernement fédéral accordait le 4,5 ça ajouterait au taux d'inflation, ça stimulerait l'inflation encore. Est-ce que vous croyez que le gouvernement fédéral devrait proposer un gel ou obtempérer finalement aux demandes du syndicat? Où est-ce qu'il devrait se situer finalement dans sa réponse?
Mais ça, c'est le cycle dans lequel nous nous trouvons. Quand les gouvernements gonflent le coût de la vie avec des déficits inflationnistes, ça augmente les prix. Donc, les fonctionnaires revendiquent une augmentation de paie pour compenser. Et ça aussi pourrait engendrer des coûts pour les contribuables. Donc, tout le monde souffre quand l'inflation gonfle. Donc, c'est pour ça que nous proposons une fin à la taxe inflation que Justin Trudeau a imposée. Et nous avons des propositions très tangibles pour y arriver. Annuler les augmentations de taxes, éliminer les déficits inflationnistes. Ça, c'est la meilleure façon de protéger les chèques de paie des travailleurs dans la fonction publique et dans le secteur privé. I should also add about this inflation tax. I expect actually the deficits for last year and this year will be smaller because the inflation will generate the government a bunch of unplanned revenue. And really what that means is that workers will have paid more taxes. They will have paid those taxes through higher gas, grocery, and housing prices. And the government will take billions of dollars in revenue from the fact that there's just more dollars being paid by consumers to sustain their cost of living. That is the very real consequence of an inflation tax. The government gets more, the rich get more, and the working class get screwed.
Thank you. Opérateur, on a une prochaine question?
Thank you. Once again, please press star 1 if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1 pour toute question. The next question is from Maury Boots, the Canadian Press. Please proceed.
Yeah, hi. Just to follow up your last point about cutting the deficit. Doesn't cutting taxes actually make it harder to shrink the deficit? And do you have a target for cutting the deficit over what period of time? And if I may, I'd just like to ask one other question following up a colleague's point. When you say you want to cut all supplementary spending, do you mean childcare? I wasn't entirely clear about that.
Thank you. Look, on your first point, we've not called for a tax cut. We're called for a tax freeze. We want the government to cancel tax increases on workers and energy that take effect on January 1st. Those tax increases should be canceled. What does that do to the deficit? Well, the deficit is the result of too much spending, not too little taxing. We have a spending problem, not a revenue problem, and that's why the government should get its spending under control and return to pre-COVID levels of expenditure so that we can phase out the deficit. Right now on childcare, what we have is more talk. Liberals have been spending billions of dollars and dozens of years promising daycare spaces. They don't exist. There's not a single $10 a day daycare space anywhere that anyone can find. So we'll see what they actually deliver. But so far, over 30 years, the answer is nothing. As by the government's own admission, after all of these billions of dollars spent, childcare is now more expensive to parents than ever before. So parents are paying more in taxes for government programs and then more in fees for childcare. It's like housing, same thing. They brag they have the biggest and most expensive housing program in Canadian history. I think Minister Hussein said it's $27 billion. And what has it delivered us? The most expensive housing prices ever. In fact, the biggest housing bubble outside of New Zealand in the world. So right now we're getting from this government with childcare and housing is more expensive government programs that lead to more expensive fees and costs to end users. So that is what we've criticized. We believe that the simplest way to make life more affordable is for government to stop taking people's money away and to leave the money in the hands that earned it.
Thank you. Opérateur, on a une prochaine question?
Thank you. There are no further questions registered at this time. Il n'y a plus de questions pour le moment. You may proceed. À vous la parole.
Thank you.
All right, we're all done?